It was 1866, a year after the Civil War finally ended. A young New York priest, Daniel S. Tuttle, penned the words of the Episcopal Convention of 1866. The vast and unsettled territories of Montana, Utah, and Idaho would become a missionary district, and he would be the bishop of the wide open range. He was perfect for the job. He had a thorough knowledge of the scriptures, the beard of a mountain man, and the physical strength to be a pioneer.
And every day he worked out. Now, this was not on a treadmill. He worked out on the parallel bars, if you can imagine that.
He was consecrated as the church's youngest bishop and would leave in spring for the Wild West. An advance party led by his brother-in-law, George Foote, started preaching in Salt Lake City's Independence Hall in May of 1867. The Episcopalians joined other non-Mormon groups using the hall on 3rd South. Bishop Tuttle's stage reached eastern Utah in the dusty heat of late June. A previous stage was attacked. It was a dangerous ride, and the bishop felt he needed a little more than just faith for the last leg of the trip.
He bought a rifle, and he did carry a weapon from time to time. He had his will made.
On July 2nd, 1867, Daniel Tuttle arrived in Salt Lake City to be met by his brother-in-law, George Foote, and this is the city he saw. The brand new Mormon Tabernacle dominated the skyline. Oxen teams dominated Main Street, and most importantly, for the first time in days, there was water for a bath. He wrote his wife that a welcome bath was how he spent his first moments in Salt Lake City.
And then they went over to have a wonderful meal at a boarding house, and I think each of them had a pint of strawberries.
He would deliver his first sermon 5 days later in Independence Hall. The Episcopal community was active. Children were already attending a new St. Mark's school, which first met in a bowling alley. A half-dozen schools, such as this Roland Hall for Girls, followed during his tenure. Of the 700 students in Episcopal schools, 500 were from LDS families. His missionary efforts to reach the LDS people through education paid off.
I think it was really the linchpin of what he thought he could do here. He never wanted to directly confront the LDS. He thought that he could not win a polemical war. In fact, that was not his temperament anyhow.
Now, this is not to say he gave glowing reports to the national church and Eastern donors about everything going on with his Utah neighbors.
And he would go back east to preach and to try and raise funds. And there his language was unrelievedly against polygamy and how it degraded women.
While his one meeting with Brigham Young was somewhat chilly, Brigham Young offered a compliment to the new Episcopal leader and his flock.
Brigham Young said, "We welcome Episcopalians because they are intelligent, educated people, and we can always deal with that sort of person."
Within a month, Tuttle was on the road. After all, he had 340,000 square miles to cover, from Montana to Utah, all on horseback or by stage. But he would build his home base in Salt Lake City. He looked at First South, past the imposing Salt Lake Theater on State Street for that base. First, the church moved the prestigious St. Mark's School to the east of the theater, a much better location than the bowling alley. Then New York architect Richard Upjohn drew up plans for a cathedral that would hold every Episcopalian in about 4 states. Bishop Tuttle laid the cornerstone of the ambitious project, logging the event into his official register on July 30th, 1870. And First South had a new landmark. You will see in this picture the current chancel to the north wasn't part of the original building. St. Mark's became the 3rd Episcopal cathedral ever built in America. An excited Bishop Tuttle held communion in the large church for the first time in 1874. St. Mark's has now been in continuous use since that first Sunday over 130 years ago, when Bishop Tuttle had made a statement. The Episcopal Church would forever be a visible and vocal part of Utah.
One of the things that he prided himself about the building of the cathedral was that it had a bell, and he said, "This is the only church bell ringing in Salt Lake City."
Bishop Tuttle wanted bells to ring throughout the area and not just in Salt Lake City. He preached the need to spread the gospel all over the three-state area. The old Wild West town of Corinne already had an Episcopal church by 1869, now long gone. The thriving rail town of Ogden was also on track to be a good location for a church. Bishop Tuttle took special interest in what would become the historic Church of the Good Shepherd. It continues as a peaceful respite in downtown Ogden. The Episcopal Church had found a new niche: the good, hard-working people in the new land. It was one of the reasons Bishop Tuttle quickly embraced the idea for St. Mark's Hospital.
There were no real policies for minor and industrial safety, and so St. Mark's Hospital set up what could be called early Blue Cross. You paid $1 a month, and then you had access to medical care.
Everything was a first in the new land: first nursing program, first schools, and holding the first Episcopal services in towns all over the Intermountain area. Bishop Tuttle carried his well-worn Book of Common Prayer to the people. Early Archdeacon L.A. Ridgely listed visits to Bingham, Eureka, Logan, Provo, Layton, and Brigham. He frequently traveled Davis County to Layton, with stops in Hooper and Farmington. He would meet about anyone interested in the Episcopal Church. Addresses were vague in the wide-open territory, such as the tailor below the hotel with a house above the chapel. The church welcomed the use of a lodge to hold a service, or as Bishop Tuttle noted on one Sunday, a service in a school in the morning and a wedding in a home that afternoon.
I feel a very strong connection with Bishop Tuttle because in many ways we are still very much of a pioneer mission in the state of ours. So as I go forward into the congregations, some of them very, very small, I feel a strong relationship with Tuttle as I go into these places. I also look for places where the church has not been. So like Tuttle, I am looking for opportunities and different ways in which we might spread the gospel.
It wasn't all spreading the gospel, it was also spreading paint on the expanding cathedral. A bill showed it took 3 men working 7 days to paint the white walls. Those were the usual 9.5-hour workdays. The total was $71.27.5. The bills kept coming. The lamp oil alone was $8.40, and the odorless sanitary company had to clean the grease trap for $3.50. Oh, and the organ pipes were $488. And on top of all that was the rector's salary of $750. Things were tight. Bishop Tuttle was lending money to the church.
It was hard work. You had to raise your own funds.
But the bishop was very good at getting donations, even from the community at large. His donation book showed the Auerbach department store family gave him $25. The bishop also got money in yearly trips to the east. He never let an opportunity pass by. St. John's in Logan was one of those funded opportunities. It also started with a school. That legacy continues. Although not in the same building, it is the third oldest congregation still active in the diocese. The Reverend P.M. Bleeker became the familiar preacher. His church register shows an interesting reason for a packed Episcopal church one Sunday. Attendance jumped tenfold to 150 when the parish's Mormon neighbors had their services canceled for the LDS conference in Salt Lake. He had compassion for his flock, once noting he canceled his sermon because it was just too hot in the church. He would preach in a Mormon school in Idaho, at St. John's, and at St. Mark's, and at St. Paul's in Salt Lake City, all in 1 month. St. Paul's Chapel was the newest church located on the far reaches of Salt Lake's downtown, Forth South and Main. The striking church lasted until 1918, when a bigger St. Paul's went to the edge of the suburbs on 9th East. St. Paul's was thriving from the beginning. In 1883, the vestry counted $186.50 in the collection plate totals for the year. Bishop Tuttle accomplished much in Utah. He will always be remembered as being resourceful. He even bought one church in Virginia City, Montana, at a sheriff's sale. After 19 years, he ended the Utah adventure. He accepted a calling to be Bishop of Missouri. He closed off his bishop's register. Thus my record is closed, and added Psalm 51 in Latin, have mercy on me.
And when he finally left, I think it was in 1887, the Deseret News said, we salute an honorable opponent, and Bishop Tuttle has been that.
Bishop Abiel Leonard was sent by the General Convention to pick up where Bishop Daniel Tuttle left off. He inherited 20 parishes in the west and western Colorado to go with Nevada and Utah. His stationery said he could be absent from his home up to a month at a time. His name shows up as the preacher in almost every parish log. And as if he didn't have enough churches, he built more. The new Westside St. Peter's would be just one of the 6 Episcopal churches in Salt Lake County under him. And St. John's started on 9th East and Logan Avenue. It is still standing, but as a duplex home. St. Andrew's started in Murray, and the Utah copper smelter town of Garfield became home to All Souls Church. And of course, St. Mark's and St. Paul's were downtown. However, no one dreamed of putting a church here in Sandy back then. It was just too small and too wild. The finances were not good. St. Andrew's and Murray showed attendance as reaching 90, but the collection plates having between 50 and 75 cents per Sunday. Yet Bishop Leonard kept thinking of the future. St. Paul's in Vernal was typical of that vision. It started in an opera house.
The owner of the Opera House, where the Episcopalians held services before the Vernal Church was built, said, "The Episcopals can rent my place anytime. They're ladies and gentlemen, they don't spit on the floor."
St. Paul's built a magnificent church right on Main Street and announced it had a thriving Sunday school with 11 scholars, 2 teachers, and 3 visitors. Those children learned to share and proudly sent 15 cents to the struggling All Souls in Garfield. Churches such as here in Garfield continued Tuttle's idea of helping the working person. Bishop Leonard started another church in the mining town of Eureka, and one in probably the dirtiest, roughest, and toughest mining towns of all to live in, Park City. Park City, like many other mining towns, would almost close up 50 years later, although St. Luke's and Park City seem to be doing a whole lot better these days. Bishop Leonard and his clergy were also enthusiastic about finding converts from other faith traditions. A turn-of-the-century record from St. Luke's shows the previous faiths of the new members. Methodists and Mormons appear to have been the most common to have joined the Episcopal Church, all baptized by Bishop Leonard. He would then move on to another church down the road. He baptized 2,500 people during his 15 years. Church membership grew, and so did St. Mark's Hospital. It would move to 2nd West in Salt Lake City. The bishop also proved to be a fundraiser. Donors could outfit an entire hospital room. or merely a rocking chair for $8.
St. Mark's Hospital became the major hospital in the West between Denver and San Francisco.
The turn of the century also saw missionaries reach the Native American nations. Bishop Leonard ordained a deacon, Milton Hersey, to serve the Utes at White Rocks. A remodeled St. Elizabeth still reflects the century-old clapboard design. And at Randlett, Hersey also served St. Paul's in Vernal and churches now gone in Roosevelt and Fort Duchesne. Randlett's Church of the Holy Spirit was the result of a $2,500 fundraising campaign in 1895. Today, both Holy Spirit and St. Elizabeth's in White Rocks are part of that legacy of the Episcopal Church, a Christian legacy that had to change and finally recognize and embrace the culture of the people and be accepted.
We had a healing service in the parish hall where all the natives come in, and then we did a spiritual blessing and with the cedar, and a medicine man came here and he blessed everybody that was having, because we had deaths that were happening one after another of our family members, so we decided to have a healing service, and we had the medicine man come in and play the drums and do prayers for us.
However, the federal government had a motive in wanting Christian religions on the reservations. It was to strip the native people of their rich culture and to change them.
We're all natives, and it's like, some of our culture can be incorporated here, and some of the culture, it makes people feel more comfortable than with, oh, that's a white man's church. But it's like, they've got some culture there, and I think that's what they like.
The Native American chapter of the Episcopal Church's early life in Utah is not one of its proudest chapters at all.
It's a wrong the Episcopal Church had to recognize and spend years to right. The bishop who spread the word far and wide and built a better hospital would suddenly die of typhoid fever at the age of 56. The next bishop was Franklin Spaulding. As a socialist, he saw the church as a vehicle for social justice. Bishop Spaulding spent a lot of time in the working towns of his district. Of course, that also meant places as far away as Durango, Colorado. But it was here in Garfield Bishop Spaulding showed his social leanings. He stood up to the Copper Company. The company did not want the church used to discuss social issues. After all, the church was on company property. He also tried to help rail workers and was then denied the customary free rail pass.
He did say to a reporter once, "Indeed, I am a Marxian socialist. Aren't you? Why aren't you? Because the gospel is the sharing of the kingdom, and the sharing of the kingdom is the sharing of material wealth with all people."
But it was Bishop Franklin Spaulding who went so far to rewrite Onward Christian Soldiers to become Onward Christian Workers. Bishop Spaulding was not a stranger to controversy. He also wrote a pamphlet that discussed LDS church founder Joseph Smith's ability to translate Egyptian works. It became the subject of newspaper story after newspaper story. The bishop glued each article into his scrapbook. Professors chimed in. Citizens from all over discussed the pamphlet for a year. The controversy even made a Swedish newspaper. He consecrated one church that thrives today with a service book bookmarked by the words from an old hymn, "The Victory of Life is Won." It was in the growing town of Provo. He saw Provo as a place that would be a struggle, but then again, he knew that there were lots of places with lots of struggles. He carried on a tradition to use the old book of consecration once given to Bishop Leonard. It was passed on through the 1970s to Bishop Otis Charles, bishop to bishop. Another decision was to bring two young priests to Logan. One would stay on to become bishop, the Reverend Paul Jones. It would happen suddenly in 1914. Bishop Franklin Spaulding was killed when hit by a car on South Temple. Even his opponents were touched. The railroad gave his family a private car for the trip home for burial.
The management and the laborers lined up in a row to salute the passing body of Franklin Spencer Spaulding.
Paul Jones was also a socialist who was recruited from seminary to serve university students in Logan. He turned his rectory at the old St. John's into a student hangout. They had a reading room, a music room, and the first library in the Cache Valley. Students flocked to discuss issues and to socialize. He decorated the room with a Yale banner, part of his Eastern heritage. The Reverend Paul Jones and his co-director, the Reverend Donald Johnson, turned St. John's into a rousing success. It grew to the point of needing a substantial church. The likable pair frequently addressed the students at what is now Utah State, and the school asked the fair-minded Paul Jones to referee college football games. The vicar of St. John's would turn the new church and St. John's House into a community magnet. He truly understood community needs such as running water and let dirty farmers and students clean their bodies and wash away their sins with both fresh bath water and a spectacular church. The annual report said they served over 9,000 people who checked out 534 books and took 573 baths. He also baptized hundreds, although not in the tub. He simply embraced the community.
Jones was pushing for water treatment centers. He was pushing for a streetcar at the same time. He was pushing for a place where farmers who came in from the fields could rest.
Bishop Spaulding was impressed and moved him to Salt Lake to take over a few missions. He was a natural to continue Bishop Spaulding's work and became the 4th bishop of the missionary district. He continued to seek workers, such as the coal miners in Carbon County. Under Bishop Jones, there would be church services throughout the Carbon and Emery County areas, including Castlegate, and the place where coal mining and the railroad came together, Helper. The peaceful man also spoke out against the impending war that we now know as World War I. It was all at a time the Utah Church had turned 50 years old. An aging Bishop Tuttle, now the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, came back to celebrate. But one could see a growing rift over the pacifist views in the church. The dean of the cathedral, the very Reverend William Fleetwood on the left in the white, had powerful vestry members upset with Bishop Jones. The influential St. Paul's also threw fuel on the fire. Ironically, the man who started the Utah work would end it all for Bishop Paul Jones. Presiding Bishop Daniel Tuttle led an official investigation.
The charges were presented against Jones, but he was never allowed to answer them. There never was really a trial at all.
The Right Reverend Paul Jones resigned. The old church stands as a legacy, but he is remembered far wider than in Logan and in this diocese. The brave stand of a peaceful man led the same national church that forced him to resign to later honor him. He is the only Utahn and one of the few people in the world to now have his own feast day in the church.
It isn't every church in which you'll serve where one of your predecessors is in lesser feasts and fasts. And that's a little daunting every once in a while when his feast day rolls around in September every year.
The removal of Paul Jones from office was a great mistake. What we learned from this is that the church does make mistakes. The church is a human institution. It is placed here by God, but it is made up of us human beings, and we are fallible. And what we learned from that period of time is how the church can err. But also we learn that the church can recognize its mistakes and redress them.
The first four bishops defined our church as a place of social justice and adventure, then and now. A church of miners in blue collars and ministers in white collars. One that has a heritage of embracing diversity today and always building to the future, then with bold statements such as St. Mark's Hospital, and now with bold statements such as the new Episcopal Church Center. Bishop Tuttle defined our faith 140 years ago. A faith not afraid to reason, and reason not ashamed to adore. For the Episcopal Church in Utah, I'm Craig Worth.